Welcome everyone. I'm Shirley Drazy. I'm the Director for Teaching and Learning, and it's our pleasure to have all of you joining us this evening. And the Truman Group is one of those groups of people whom the school partners with to help support our programs, our kids, our staff, our parents. And Sean Truman has been a guest here a number of times already in the last few years. And so he's probably a familiar face. And they're doing a special session tonight about helping parents work with their children who are between 4 and 11. In other words, the young'uns. And so Sean, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce what we're doing tonight.
Great, thanks, Shirley. I am joined here by my colleague, Meg McNulty, who's on the screen next to me. And the two of us have come tonight because we're going to talk a little bit about some big broad things, and then more specifically, Meg is going to talk about a program that we're really excited to be rolling out for the first time, actually, to the AES community. Shirley and I worked quite a bit this summer to try to think about ways that we could do more to support parents in particular, and especially parents of young children. And so Meg will talk a little bit about that in a couple of minutes, but there was just a couple of things that I'd like to do first, if you don't mind. The first is, as I'm looking at all of us here, if you're able to, if you wouldn't mind turning your video on, I would be deeply grateful. It's really difficult speaking into the void. I think I don't know if I told you this the other day, but my favorite experience of this so far was when I was giving, it was kind of a good sized talk. And did I tell you this story, Shirley? And there was a guy who was reading, I was giving this talk, and for some reason he was on my feed, and he was reading the newspaper, and he was eating a bowl of cereal while he was doing it. And his cat walked over, put his foot in the cereal and tipped it into his lap, and he jumped up, and it turned out the guy was not wearing pants. So if you are wearing, even if you're not wearing pants, as long as you can assure everybody is shooting from the waist up, it was very difficult. I had to continue to give the talk without any, I couldn't say, sir, your video's on, you should be aware of the fact that everybody's watching you here. Certainly I was. So thank you all very much for coming. So what we want to talk about today is parenting, your kids, COVID, and try to think a little bit about some of the issues that you're all coping with in this really just extraordinarily difficult time. I'm going to toggle back and forth a little bit between sharing my screen and having us all be like this, because it's easier for us to sort of see each other, and hopefully we'll be able to get through some of these things. As I said, I've got my colleague Meg McNulty here. Meg is going to talk a little bit about a program that we're developing to provide support to parents of young children. And Meg, I was thinking perhaps we could kick off with that, because I think it's exciting and kind of fun. Do you want to just sort of start us off?
Sure. Thanks,
Great.
Sean. It's great to be here. I know it's your evening, so thanks for inviting us into your homes after I saw someone's trying to get their child to bed while wearing pants. Thank you. So we just wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking about the idea of parenting children, particularly when you're with them often, 24 hours a day now, and what that's like to try to attune to them and meet their needs while also trying to meet some of your own and not feel so overwhelmed. I'll say for a moment, I'm also a parent, as Sean is. Raised my kids overseas. I'm now in Seattle, Washington. But I certainly wish I had more of these tools when my children were younger. And yet there's plenty of things that can be done even when when your kids are older. But this idea of sort of really attuning and paying attention is incredibly important. But also paying attention to yourself. So let me start by asking you to kind of think back, and in these days of COVID, it's probably not particularly hard to think of a time over the past month where your child was upset in some way, scared or angry or sad or otherwise frustrated, something that comes to mind? It doesn't have to be the biggest reaction they've had over the past month, but something that where you knew that they were kind of struggling emotionally. I'll give you a second to think about that. And if you don't mind, and Sean, you can help me. Sean and I are doing this chat feature for the first time together, so appreciate your grace in letting us try this. But Sean, if you would look in the chat as well as I'm looking, if you wouldn't mind sharing how you knew that your child was upset, what told you that your child was struggling emotionally? Sometimes it's very overt, right? They're crying, and sometimes it could look like, they're, oh, interesting, getting bored. I was going to say it could look like they're withdrawing. So they're bored easily, sleeping late. Sean, what else are you seeing?
Yeah, wouldn't get off the couch, sleeping late, just feeling bored, being more sort of reactive in terms of not being willing to engage, running away when things weren't going well, and saying no. Are there any more here? I think that's all of them.
Great, thanks.
Nightmares, disrupted sleep, picking fights with siblings.
Yeah, these are unpleasant and often hard to deal with. And yet I still think the fact that you're noticing them is what is the first part of that word attunement that I used earlier, that you're paying attention. And attunement has two parts. It's that you're paying attention and you're responding. So often as parents, I'm guilty as charged too. Schoolwork's getting overwhelming. School work avoidance, we're seeing that a lot, at least in Truman Group. So of course we want to do something, and sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't go well, right? And if your screens are on, you can sort of give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down, or you can use it in the chat. You can sort of let me know whether your intervention, when they were upset, when you noticed them being upset, went well. And when it didn't go well. These often are, our intentions don't always play out as well as they do in our heads. Sean, sorry, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, somebody added another one that I thought was really interesting, which is fear when I want to take her out of the home, which is a different level of sort of intensity and context, which I think is
Yeah. Okay. These are really interesting, of just kids who feel kind of on the edge. And this cueing that you're doing of noticing kids, noticing their trends, knowing that something is off. Of course it's off. We're in this global pandemic together, and we have a frame we can put around it. Kids can't. They're obviously sometimes that works to our advantage because kids can be so here and now, and so they're self-focused, and that's actually sometimes we can use that to our advantage. But it's funny when we think about cueing. I have a teenager and then a tweener, and my teenager, those cues are different, right? And even with my 11-year-old, they're different. Because when were we the most attuned to our children? Ironically, when we were most exhausted, right? When our kids were infants. We knew what kind of cries they had. We knew the hurt cry. We knew the hungry cry, the tired cry. We even, we had all of these. I mean, it's really quite sophisticated, the level of intensity of, and you'd hear parents talk about, oh, that's his frustrated cry. Or oh, she's teething. I can tell it from her cry. So knowing someone's pain that well, we were just exhausted and yet so attuned, and that goes away, doesn't it? Some of that attunement goes away often because what starts happening? They start talking, and so start to think, or this, it's understandable. Most of us do it. Once we get words, we kind of assume that those cries will translate to the correct words. And so understandably, we attune less because kids are communicating, and sometimes they're communicating loudly, and obviously sometimes they're communicating with their body language. And yet and so sometimes that becomes so complicated that folks like Sean and I can help. And yet there's things that parents can do that allow us to kind of get to that more attuned place and put less pressure on us as well, and build the relationship. And we obviously need to keep listening intently. And in a busy world, in a COVID world, how do we do that? The attunement strategy for older kids sounds simple, but it's not easy, which is just to do more listening than talking. I do an exercise in my private practice of my clinical work with parents and children, where I ask children to say what their parents are going to say. And for the kind of 10 and older set, they can almost tell you exactly what their parents were going to say in terms of a lecture or some reassurance. And so for the older kids, I don't know how many of you on here have kind of the 10-year-old and older set, but and Sean will talk more to this in a bit, is the sort of figuring out how to listen well and differently. For the younger set, of course, there's lots of different approaches that work. The one I specifically want to talk about is this program. And it really sort of gets to three pieces. So for those of you earlier that said that your intervention when your children are upset worked, my sense is generally what happens is your attunement was good. You got it right. You understood kind of what their internal world was. That's hard to do. So give yourself credit for all of you that are kind of paying attention and getting it right and attuning. That fantastic. The second thing that probably went well is that your instincts or your skills were good, were solid. You had this phrase that we use, which is parental competence, which just sounds really like this hard thing to get to. But that piece of kind of knowing like, oh, I've done this before, or you just have an instinct that your intervention is going to work. And then what I call this third piece of status quo, that your kind of current state of being was present. And so of course we get tired, or we've had a tough day, or what have you. That for whatever reason you were able to sort of attend to the moment, that your kind of status quo was really sort of present for your child. And those three things are hard to do. In the program that I'm going to talk about, it's really called responsive play. The concept is having play sessions at home that are rich in this word I keep using, attunement, that you're paying attention to your child in the most natural ways. And this is now for the younger set, obviously, kind of the 10 and under, 11 and under set, responding to your child in ways that are natural to them in terms of using their play. We often say that toys are words and play is children's language. And so there's lots of examples in this. If we have time later, I can share some, but essentially there's about 4 skills that parents learn, and it's really a group model, a coaching model. And one of them is the piece that I think is kind of the Sean uses the phrase, the kind of the special sauce or the secret sauce. It's about empathy, right? So in a play session, you've oh, that's really frustrating, or oh, that was exciting. It doesn't always have to be a negative emotion. And so kids start to sort of learn that. The other piece around skills, and we won't get into all of these obviously, but the next piece is around reflecting. And again, those of you that might have older children too, this reflecting piece is important. That's, that stinks. It didn't go your way. You worked so hard, it didn't work out. Or you worked hard and it worked out, that sort of thing. So your children feel seen, they feel understood, and they don't feel judged. So we're not praising them. We're just sort of seeing them as and being kind of their witness. There is limit setting. I don't want to get too much into that one, but of course our kids do need limits, and that's also often really reassuring to kids. And then there's another piece around what I say kind of backseat taking, and this one was really important for me when my kids were younger, of letting them kind of lead the show. Not all the time, but this is about we work toward about a 20 to 30 minute play session a week. And so it's, the idea is that as taking a back seat, you're kind of able to observe children a different way. And this helps with some of that attunement. I did, when my older child was younger, I did some of this kind of work, kind of informally, and I realized how much he asked questions and how much I wanted to answer questions for him. And so
can I just say a couple of things about some of this, because I think these are incredibly important points, and you get just a little bit of context in this community too. So one of the things that's really striking as a guy who's been in the school a bunch of times is I've had people come up to me and say, hey, listen, I've got young kids. How do we do more for our young children in particular? And I think that, Meg is sort of steeped so deeply in the thinking around how to engage children in a really substantial and supportive way. What we were talking about here, and I should have done a better job introducing this. It's really to think about how do we do more for parents to help support kids who are struggling with all kinds of emotional disruption in a way that we don't really easily help you with using the Truman Group. And so I think now what we should probably do is talk just a little bit about the actual structure of the groups that we're talking about. These are, Meg is giving you this really beautiful sort of rich kind of conceptual idea about why we think about kids' emotion and how we can start to do stuff for them in a really good and supportive way, and how she can help teach some of that. But I think that the other part is we should just probably tell you, like, okay, we're also we're going to do this program at AES for the first time, and we're hopeful that that this is something that will be helpful and supportive for the school. And maybe, Meg, could we talk just a little bit about some of that context and maybe some of the structure and like the number of sessions, the kind, ages of kids and stuff like that?
Oh, sure. The practical logistics piece. Sure.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. There's some passion here around kind of the ideas and making sure people get the ideas.
It's not right. Meg's first rodeo teaching this stuff to parents. So
right. But of course, doing this on this platform, it's that piece is new, right? So we're thinking about 5 or 6 families who are interested in sort of this kind of work, or kind of knowing their children and working with their children in a planned way. So like I said, about 5 or 6 families in a group setting. We do probably one session just alone, just to best understand what's going on with your child. And then we kind of learn together for about 6 sessions, 6 weeks. If they're, they may be consecutive weeks. We're quite open to what works for your community. And then we're hoping for about 75 minutes per session. And what it looks like is, learning the ideas, trying it out, coaching, kind of learning from each other, quite a collaborative approach. Sean, does that get closer to the specifics?
It does. And I think that, what we're going to do, Shirley will be in touch, the school will be in touch to let people know about ways that they can get access to this. So again, just to restate, I think, we're talking about finding ways of doing more to support parents of young children with the idea that what we want you to do is want you to be more sensitive to the emotional experiences that they're having, more attuned to their emotional experiences, and then working to basically be more responsive to them in ways that are essentially in our world therapeutic, that we think about being more congruent with what your kids need, young children need, so that they're able to do better. And I think we're excited because it's something we haven't done before, and we're hoping that it's that's something that we can launch in the AES community in a way that's going to be helpful to you all. Is that, does anybody have any questions? Yeah, Shirley?
And Sean, so in another day or so, we will send some information out to parents, and especially to those of you who are on the call, so that you'll know the particulars about, if you're interested, you'll be able to sign up for that. And if we get a lot of folks, we'll have to talk about how to do more than one of those series. But you will get information about how to get signed up if you're interested in taking the classes. Okay?
That's great. Thank you. So we wanted to introduce the notion of this program. What we didn't do, and I probably, again, I forgive me for falling short. I didn't really do what I should have done first, which is to just sort of talk a little bit about who we are. I mean, I see so many, I think it's because I saw a number of friendly faces. Some of them I've known from the school. And then as for those of you who got on early, and it was, you know, people who we've been connected to far afield in Africa as well. So it's really nice to see everybody. So Meg and I both work at the Truman Group. The Truman Group is a group that provides care to people living internationally. We've been connected to AES for a number of years now, and I've been on the campus, and it's been my great pleasure to be connected to you all. I'm so sorry that I'm not there in person. Coming to AES is one of my favorite places to be honest with you. I love visiting the school. It's an amazing community of people, and I really enjoy it. So what I'd like to do, of course, as I was driving in today, Shirley called me and told me that the Indian government had just declared that there was going to be a timeline for opening of schools that was not necessarily entirely congruent with what you had expected. And we were commiserating and laughing together. And I think what's difficult is that we have this situation where nothing is predictable. Nothing is predictable. We are in this situation where we have fundamentally to deal with the psychology of uncertainty. And in some respects, I think that that's what we've got to talk about as we talk about, being attuned to your own children, being attuned to your own experience emotionally. I love the way that Meg framed this, because it's the idea that you recognize what's going on in your own experience and you try to figure out ways to deal with it. And what I'd like to talk about are the effects briefly on parents, the effects on kids, and the effects on teachers in the school. I mean, this uncertainty is really difficult. If you take somebody and you say to them, okay, look, we're going to give you a really bad time. First thing we're going to do is we're going to stick you in a cold room for 32 minutes. And then we're going to beat you with a stick 17 times. And then we're going to not give you food for half an hour. And then after that, we're going to make you walk around barefoot on thorns for 20 minutes. You're like, well, it's really a pretty terrible day. But, after I get through that, 20th minute with the thorn thing, I'm going to be good. It'll be done. And if you think about that, that's the way that we get through adversity, right? You frame it up. You say, okay, I got to figure out how we're going to get through this moment. I got to figure out how we're going to get through this series of things. And the problem with the adversity right now is we don't know. We don't have good timelines. We don't know what's going on. The problem with parents is that's coming in the context of you trying to work and trying to juggle all of these tasks as you're trying to raise kids, support them with distance learning. You're expecting that the kids are going to go to school, but then they can't go to school because it's hybrid, and then it's not hybrid, and the school's doing its best because they're trying to do this. And by the way, I know because again, I was in contact with Shirley over the course of the summer, hundreds of hours trying to figure through sort of the complexity of all of the logistics of this stuff. Children, it's the same. We've got kids who at a certain point become demoralized and they're not able to sort of think about what's going to come after because it feels like it's endless for them. And effects on teaching staff in the school as well, because people have been working, trying to find ways to really support your children effectively. And then the terms keep changing. It's an extraordinarily difficult thing. So here's what I want to do fairly quickly. The news isn't great, but let me just say this. What I want to do is I want to try to make the unknown a little bit more known. And so it's a little dark before the light. So I'm going to go through this maybe at a little bit faster clip than I normally would, because I don't want to get too bogged down in the dark, depressing stuff. I want to start with you. I want to talk about parent vulnerability, and I want to talk about that before we got to COVID. So I wrote a paper with a couple of colleagues a while ago. And basically, we were interested in looking at how people who lived internationally were affected by their experience of being far from home. And it turns out that people who are living far from home have significantly greater mental health risk than people who are living in their home countries, living and working, where their families are and where they were raised. And so the reason we did that study is because people had talked about this stuff kind of broadly in the clinical world, but nobody had ever really seen it. And I won't bore you with the details, but what's really important is that living overseas is hard, and living in international communities is hard. And for many of you, especially for people who have been in one place and then moved to another, if you've got blended families, if you're from India, but you've got family members who are in and out of the country, or you're divided or separated, these are very, very complicated family systems and social systems that are really difficult to manage, and especially so in COVID. So you know, we've seen a lot of difficulty in the last 10 or 15 years in kids, especially with regard to anxiety and depression. And when I've been on the campus before, we've talked quite a bit about this. And I think it's really important that you know, we highlight that, because these are the same problems or the same domains of problems that we're seeing kids struggling with, and actually adults struggling with right now as we get to COVID. All right, so this is kind of the dark part. So if you can, I'm going to monitor Shirley though, because I've got Shirley's face up on the screen, and if she starts to look crestfallen, I know that we've gone to the dark side, and then I'm just going to have to whiz through a whole bunch of slides so that we don't, you know, end up in, you know, despair here. Here's the thing, you know, what I want to try to understand this stuff and make it comprehensible, so that we're not just saying, oh my gosh, you know, the world is on fire, the kids are doing terribly, we're doing terribly, we're so overwhelmed, there's no hope. It's like, wait a second. There are things that are really difficult about what's going on right now. And I think we should talk about specifically what some of that stuff is, because that then makes it possible for us to be thoughtful and intentional about how do we support ourselves, and how do we intervene both for parents and for kids in ways that are smart and hopefully going to be more effective. So my least favorite part about this is that these are US data. The reason that they're US data is because it's really hard to get international data. And the CDC is the Center for Disease Control, which until very recently was a very apolitical organization in the United States that was very universally respected for sort of housing epidemiologic data. And as part of that, they have sort of taken snapshots of a whole bunch of things, including mental health, well-being, over the course of time. And so there was a national sample that filled out questionnaires between June 24th and June 30th this year. And they self-reported about how they were doing for the previous 30 days. And these were adult participants, 18 years old or older. And there was a lot of them. There was like 5,400 people involved in this. And in general, the findings were terrible. 40% report bad situation in terms of mental health conditions, with 30% having significant symptoms of anxiety, depression. That's almost a third. 26% trauma-related disorder, 13% increasing or starting substance in response to difficulty, and 10% of people had suicidal ideation. This is a general population. This is not a psychologically disrupted group of people that we especially are looking at, you know, people who are in you know, a hospital. We're talking about just people in the U.S. This is unheard of. We've never seen data like this. And this is what we're looking at as a function of COVID. And the reason that we know that is because if you look at this, they did the same thing 1 year earlier at the same time. And if you look at the rates for anxiety, if you can see my cursor here, 8% were responding as having significant anxiety in 2019. 1 year later, 25%. So a multiple of 3 or so. Depression, 6.5% up to 24, a multiple of almost 4. Substance use, we didn't have it reported in 19 in the same way. We're over 10% people responding as using substances in ways that were problematic in response to the stress sort of associated with COVID. And for suicidal ideation, more than double. We've not seen this before. This is a scope and a scale of effect on mental health and people's emotional stability in a way that is unlike anything I've ever seen in my career. Meg, would you say that this is anything am I overstating it here, would you say?
No, I think, yeah, absolutely. This is what we're seeing in clinic.
Sometimes you'll see a statistically significant increase of 3%, and everybody makes a big deal about it because the statisticians get all excitable about stuff. What's unbelievable about this is that the scale of this change is bigger than anything any of us have ever seen before. What's weird as well is the effects are more pronounced, psychological effects, the younger people are. So people who are on the earlier side developmentally are experiencing more disruption. And again, this was something that Shirley and I were talking about a little bit earlier in the day. We're seeing young people, young adults and older adolescents who are struggling with more emotional disruption as a function of COVID than the people who are older. What's paradoxical about that is people who are older are at greater risk for really bad stuff happening, and younger people are actually at significantly lower risk. So it's this weird inverse relationship where on the one hand, people have worse worse emotional experience, but less physical risk. And then it goes the other way, more physical risk and less emotional disruption. So there are some effects by race, and there are some effects by some other categories. And we know that this child and this vulnerability is very significant. And I think that the reason I'm saying this is because we've been clear that before COVID there was a lot of mental health risk in these communities for kids. And so I've been on the campus and talked about that at some length. And the question is, well, why? I mean, let's put COVID up on the top of this slide instead of the bottom of the slide. I mean, obviously COVID. But what I want to do is I want to be thinking about this, not just in terms of the immediacy of COVID right now, but I also want to think about what we can do in communities to help support kids more effectively. And I've got all of about, 20 minutes to convey it to you. So it's going to be speedy. I think one of the things that's really difficult is, and especially at a community like AES, where you've got, very, very high achieving parents, you've got very, very smart children, you've got very, very educated people in the community, there's an extraordinary pressure for achievement. And I think that one of the things that we're seeing really in a really compelling way right now is that many, many parents are concerned about their kids falling behind. And we'll return to that point in a little bit. But I think that more broadly, even before we got to COVID, there has been sort of this baseline concern among educated, bright, talented, achieving families that they want their kids to do well. I think that we've seen really significant changes in family structure and really big changes in parenting. And that affects the ways that kids are experiencing their emotional worlds in ways that are really powerful. And then, of course, everybody wants to talk about technology. Now, I got to tell you, before COVID happened, everybody was eager to beat up on social media. Everybody hated the amount that kids were on social media, and everybody hated the fact that they were on screens all the time. Paradoxically, these screens have turned out to be the single social lifeline for many, many kids in terms of being able to be connected to their friends and for them to get social support. So we're in this weird paradox right now, where on the one hand, for a while, I was kind of beating the drum of, hey, we got to be really thoughtful about how much kids are on these screens and the degree to which their social interaction is happening remotely as opposed to in the physical world. Now I'm in this weird situation where I have people saying, well, Dr. Truman, do you think that kids should be connected to their friends on screens? And is that good? It's like, well, it depends on the alternative. If the alternative is, yeah, you can talk to your friends on the screen or you can not talk to your friends, I'm all for the screens. I'm all for the screens. I mean, the alternative to that would be, I guess you could write a letter or you could strap a little message on a pigeon or something and send it out the window and it could go over to your friend's house and they could unroll the scroll and read it that way. But I mean, I think, the reality is that it's absolutely essential that kids have access to each other and their ability to be connected and to socially support each other, relationally support each other is the concern that I have about this COVID experience with regard to mental health. The issues around constriction and anxiety and some other stuff, which we're going to talk about a little bit in a few minutes, I mean, those are really present too. But the single biggest concern I have is the degree to which people are isolated and how that is connected to the ways that they experience emotional disruption in their world. Now, I want to talk about anxiety a little bit because I have all these people talking to me, well, I've got anxiety and there's this anxiety and there's that anxiety. And anxiety, people are talking about anxiety like they talk about cancer. Anxiety is absolutely intrinsically present in all of us because it's functional. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. So let's just take a minute here. The first question I have, I should have done this before I put the slide up. What's anxiety? Somebody be brave, come off mic, put the little mic on. Tell me what anxiety is. Somebody tell me what they think. I will be patient. I will wait. I will even call on Shirley if you make me, which is sort of fun, to be honest with you. Somebody? All right, Shirley, it's your day. We didn't even plan this. Shirley's really looking at me like this was not part of the idea here.
It's when you're worried about that something might or might not happen, and it's causing you undue discomfort or stress?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. So there's this experience that people have, but I'm going to even break that down even further. So if you look back and you say, okay, what's going on in this situation? The first thing that you have when you're dealing with anxiety is you have a physiologic response. Something changes physically. All right. And what does that change? The change is you basically activate. Your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, your respiration rate goes up, you start sweating. You're anticipating something physically. I think that point's really nice, actually, Shirley, that you're kind of like, something's happening. Something's happening in my environment. I got to be thoughtful about that. And I want you to be thinking about all of these things in the context of COVID, okay? Because it's important. These changes aren't simple, they're interpreted. So your training and your past experience, your beliefs, all of these things affect the ways in which you experience these physiologic changes. What do you mean, Sean? You could say. Well, like, think about this. Say you're in a situation where you're extraordinarily fearful. Physically, what do you feel? Is your heart pounding? Yes, I see people nodding. Do you feel sweaty? Right? Do you start breathing fast? Right? Now think about somebody says to you, I've got the most amazing, exciting present that you have ever had in your entire life. You know that thing that you never told anybody that you really, really wanted because you weren't supposed to want it, but you really, truly did? You really wanted it down deep. You really wanted it. Maybe, you just, and they say, well, I've got it for you in the other room. What's your experience right there? The excitement causes you to. Your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, you breathe faster. So what's the difference between like the physiological arousal for excitement and the physiological arousal for fear? There is none. Physically, we experience the same things. The reason I'm saying that is because if you think about the way that all of this gets transacted and the way that you feel, part of it's about what you experience and part of it is what you expect is going to happen, which gets me to exactly the point that Shirley made, which is anxiety, the thing that we're dealing with so much in the context of COVID, it is about an activating emotion. It either increases the probability that you're going to engage the thing that's worrying you. Like, for example, I haven't studied for the exam. I'm all worried about it. Oh my gosh, I feel all this anxiety. And you're going to do one of two things. Either you're going to engage the thing that you need to do, which is study, or you're going to avoid it. You're going to be like, yeah, I'll just watch some more YouTube videos and it'll all be okay. The other thing it does, anxiety increases your sensitivity to your environment. It increases the amount that you're able to take in perceptually. You don't need as much noise in order for it to be hearable for you. You don't need to, it makes you very, very sensitive to your environment. The reason that this is important is if you think about COVID in the context of some of this stuff, I mean, anxiety is this universal, adaptive, essential component of psychology, of our psychological makeup, of our behavior and our social function. So when we say that the kids are being anxious and that there's something wrong that's going on, it's like, well, it's uncomfortable. They're not enjoying the experience. You're not enjoying the experience. But we've got to stop framing this as somehow it's pathological, that there's something wrong with us. It's the opposite. There's something right with us. And the reason I'm really focusing on this is because when I've gone into schools and I've been talking about this, everybody's talking about anxiety all the time and how reactive they are to the anxiety itself. And what I'm trying to say is, yeah, it's anxiety, but it's not as dangerous and it's not as scary as everybody is responding to. High anxiety, really high anxiety, is a different story. You got to think about it like pain. I mean, the difference between stubbing your toe and, chopping your finger off, those are two really extremely different experiences because they inform you about difference in the way that your world is going. So think about anxiety in terms of adaptive value, less in terms of symptoms, and then just to be aware of some of the states that interfere with your adaptive function, right? So like one of the things that we are seeing on the sort of hard side are things like panic. Does anybody, one of the things I want to do here is I want to just briefly say, when we talk to kids in schools right now, we very frequently have kids tell us, oh, I've got panic. Okay, what's panic? you guys didn't tell me what anxiety was, and I'm not going to call on you again, because that would just be just looking at Julie and deciding that I was going to talk to Julie about panic would be totally unfair. But Julie, if I was going to pick on you, individually, what is panic? Do you know what a panic attack is? Do you know how to define that?
I mean, I imagine there's something physiological about it and more extreme.
Yes. So panic is an onset, a very rapid onset of anxiety that's extremely high, where you're going along and you feel really pretty good. And then suddenly heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up. People feel these extraordinarily powerful sense of fear and disorientation, where they're absolutely sure that they're losing control. And it lasts for a very short period of time. The symptoms are primarily associated with hyperventilation, breathing in a really scary way. Right? The reason I'm saying this is because we have a lot of kids saying, I've got panic attacks all the time. And you're talking, and they say, well, I'm having one right now. And you're thinking to yourself, no, you're anxious, which is, a different thing from a panic attack. When somebody's in the middle of a panic attack, it is not subtle. I mean, they're not having relaxed conversations with you about how they're feeling about themselves in that moment. They're sweating, they're overwhelmed, their vision frequently changes. And so the reason I'm saying all this is because if we can start to be more precise and more aware and educated about the experiences that that we have and our kids have around some of this stuff, we can be less fearful and less reactive about what's going on. Because the truth of the matter is, all of this stuff with COVID is really a difficult and environmentally stressful situation that we've got to cope with. There's all kinds of other anxiety disorders that are out there. There's people who have phobias, which are specific things, generalized anxiety disorder and trauma and stuff. So I think, the reason I really want to talk to you about these issues is I don't want to focus. So this is now, all right, we've gone through the dark part of this, and now we get to the light. So the good news is there are things we can do. There's things that you can do as parents, which is what Meg was talking about when she was talking about attunement with children. I love the framework that she used. I mean, I should have had a bigger drum roll when Meg came in, because she just started. I should have been like, okay, look, the big thing here when I was introducing her is, in order for you to be adequately responsive to your children and the needs that they have emotionally, you've got to be aware of what the hell's going on with them emotionally, right? And the difficulty is that it's not always easy to do, because little kids, they respond using one set of cues, and bigger kids do it differently. I mean, do any of you guys have older kids, adolescent kids, who you say to them, hey, how are you doing? And they say, I'm fine. How's it going? Good. Really? Are you okay? Yeah, I'm okay. I told you, I'm good. Does this sound familiar to anybody? Does anybody have a 14, 15-year-old dude in their house who eats a lot of their food and then is sort of surly and not very responsive? And then when you try to be a good parent and try to engage them, they say, yeah, you're bothering me. You are a bothersome person. How can you attune to that human being? That human being is saying, go away from me. When they're little and they fall and they bang their head, they put their arms up and they're like, pick me up, I'm injured, right? When they get older, when they're injured, they say, go away from me, I don't want to talk to you, until it's 11:30 at night when you have a presentation for work due in the morning. It's completely outside of the convenient times for you to speak to the child. And that is the moment they pour coffee and they say, I have to tell you all of my problems and all of my thoughts and all of my fears. And it's going to go on for quite some time. The point here is that we have a huge role developmentally in helping kids to, learn how to regulate themselves emotionally. Think about it. Think about how important your job is, and think about the ways in which, if you're available and attuned to your kids' experience, that you can do things and help them regulate their emotional experience in ways that they can't do for themselves. I mean, everything from when they're little and a kid's starting to get frazzled, what do you tell them? And they start doing stuff they pick up and they start flailing around. When they're really little, you say things like, hey, bud, use your words. Are you upset? And then you say to them, use your words, but then you make the words for them because their brain is boiling. And so you say, whoa, you look really mad. Are you are you upset right now? And they're banging on things. And then they're like, yes, You're like, well, good. Okay, well, all right. Yeah, no, no wonder you're upset because, Bob took your truck and that's a bad thing because, he just stole your stuff. Right? So that in the one level of child development and parenting is sort of one end of the continuum. And if you think about it further downstream, as kids get older, when they're 16, 17 years old and they're learning how to regulate themselves still in a much deeper, more profound level, there's all kinds of stuff that you can do, but it's a more nuanced thing that requires a lot of talking to them. But the key, as Meg said, is that you're aware of what's going on with kids. Distress tolerance. I want you to think about, as we're thinking about COVID, the idea that distress does not necessarily mean that the world is coming to an end, and that we want to communicate that to our children. We say, it's a hard time. But you know what? People have gone through a hard time a lot over the course of humanity. I'm not saying that this isn't really disruptive and that isn't really affecting people, but we want to contextualize this and frame this with hope. We've gotten to a situation where a lot of the media, a lot of the ways that we're representing the emotional experience associated with COVID is about people saying things like the dark stuff of what I started with, which is it's terribly affecting people who are younger and it's more profoundly, it's like, and they have the bad metrics and the scary music and all that stuff. It's true, but it's also the case we're going to be okay. It's also the case that we have to endure through this difficult period. And that if you tell kids that being distressed is just part of this experience, and as bad as it is, it's gonna get better eventually, even though it really sucks right now. It's a really powerful message for kids. And it's a really powerful way to start to think about these things. And that you need to be able to, like when you're in these circumstances, to get to have risk and to manage failure, you want them to, develop more social sensitivity, and to get social support. So again, when you think about the ways that you get through adversity, when that kid is rejecting you, how is it that you can most effectively, kind of be there for them? And the answer is you need to be able to both be attuned to their emotional experience, and then you've got to be able to engage them in some kind of supportive action. That's about intimacy and helping them develop soothing. Again, normalize distress and be focused on the idea that, look, we're going to get through this period, and differentiate between what hurts and what is harming your kid and yourself for that matter. One of the things that's really difficult right now is that we're lumping, and again, I think the popular press is doing a lot of this, which is why I'm making such a big deal of this. We're lumping things that hurt with things that harm people. Oh, was there a question there? Or are you just stretching there, Charlie? Okay, so I think the thing about this is that lots of things are really uncomfortable and things can hurt. Like if you stick yourself with a needle, that hurts, right? Slamming your hand in a car door and breaking the bones in your hand, that harms you, right? And we want to be really attuned emotionally to the difference between things that are difficult and painful, but nonetheless, people can endure through and be okay. And to really be kind of aware of that and to talk about it and to say, look, and to kind of recognize it. I think it's really, for those of you who've heard me speak before, I think it's really important to focus on concrete, actionable things that you can do to support your kids. If you don't remember anything else that I've talked about today, would you just remember one thing? Shirley's going to roll her eyes. I'm picking on Shirley a bunch today, but she's heard me say this: sleep. We already had an incredibly disrupted sleep thing going on in our kids, right? And this was before COVID. What has COVID done? Well, COVID's completely screwed up all the normal rhythms and routines of your life, your wake cycle, your sleep cycle. Screens are everywhere always. I am totally fine with the use of screens. As I just said, I'm not an anti-screen guy. However, these things are extremely good at invading sleep. If you have a phone near you when you're sleeping, you will sleep less well, and so will your children. Why? Well, because they are designed by very smart people who went to places like Harvard and MIT and Caltech and stuff. And the more that you look at this, the more money these people make. They don't care what the hours of the day are. They want you to look at the phone. And if you say, yes, Sean, but I see here, it says 9:52, because that's what time it is here. At 9:52, yes, but I need it for my alarm clock. I would say to you, you are not just using it for alarm clock, because when you turn this thing over to see what time it is, all of the scrolling information that, you know, like the text from whomever pings you, and then you have to read it because you can't not read a text. It's called the Stroop effect. You can't ignore something in front of you in writing. And if your sister, who is in a different time zone, has texted you, you will read the time zone, or you will read the text. It will wake you up. For as much as possible, move your bodies and get your kids to move their bodies and see if you can get natural light. And if it's possible, be outside. I get in Delhi, that's a little bit complicated because air quality is an issue, and it, you know, everybody's so circumscribed and sort of squeezed right now. And short-term goals, clear next steps. Try to structure yourselves as much as possible, because again, we started this whole thing about talking about the psychology of uncertainty. So what we're talking about here in a variety of different ways is trying to break our experiences down so that we can think about them, talk about them, and understand them in a way that's not characterized by as much uncertainty. It's not like, oh my goodness, the world is crazy and I just feel so anxious. It's like, no, there are particular things about the way the world is going right now that is causing us to be anxious, because we have an anxiety system that works in specific ways. One of the ways is it feeds dramatically off of sleeplessness. And if you can, you should be really careful about that. Make sure that your kids are engaged as much as possible. You want kids to not be avoidant, and you want kids to be able to engage in their lives in as many routine ways as possible. And I understand that that's extraordinarily difficult right now to support. Of course, going to school helps with that, right? But help them recognize that, you know, this is something that is going to be time limited, and that over time we're going to find a way through this, and we're going to get through it. A point that I wanted to make, because I know that so many parents and so many communities are really worried about the academic achievement of their kids as they're going through this really difficult stretch. I just want to say this, that if you can support your kids socially and emotionally in a more effective way, it's going to translate to them being more effective at school. This isn't about me being a soft psychologist type. As Meg will be the first to tell you, I am not that soft a psychologist as a human being. I'm kind of like more of an auto mechanic of a psychologist than the softer side of psychology. The reason I'm saying this is because if you have somebody who is emotionally really disrupted, and then you put them in a classroom where they have to learn calculus, their ability to learn effectively is not going to be good. This is about advantaging your kids. As much as it's possible, you want your kids to be socially connected, emotionally stable, and like supported as much as you possibly can. And that you want to manage your own expectations around the achievement that they're going to get. I think in a lot of respects, what we're in right now is an academic holding pattern. Kids in general are not making huge strides academically as we're doing a lot of this remote work. And I know your school is working hard to produce really good, rich academic opportunities for your kids. But the reason that it's so hard is because the kids are really dramatically disrupted in many of their experiences around sort of managing themselves emotionally. And what I'm saying is, the more emotionally sort of managed effectively they are, the better off they're going to do. So emotion stuff comes first, academic stuff comes second. I've had parents say, I just want my kid in front of that screen so they can learn this stuff. They're falling behind because of the way the last school year has gone. And you know what? I know they're anxious, but you know what? They've got to suck it up. It's like, be careful about that, because that kind of compression on kids in the environment that we're in right now doesn't necessarily lead to the kinds of academic sort of development that we really know that they need to have. So it's not that we're going soft on this stuff. We just need to be a little bit more strategic about some of it. Interaction is better than passive engagement. So we want kids talking, want them like not just sort of watching YouTube, but want them talking to each other. Social support's key. For you and the kids, this is not working from home. You know, working from home or going to school remotely, that's like a choice. You know, this is like us weathering this pandemic. And ultimately what we're going to do is we're going to get out of this environment and we're going to go back. Think about how you structure your situation. I know lots of people have been doing this already, but having portions of your house where you work and portions of your house where you don't work, having clear delineation between when kids are at school and when they're not, when you're at work and not, it really can be helpful to kind of give yourself more structure around how you manage all of this. Finally, I'm not downplaying how powerful anxiety can be and how impairing it can be. What I'm talking about is trying to be analytical about what it is and to be sophisticated about it. But the question is, well, how much anxiety is too much, and then what do you do? And what I would say to you is it's where anxiety and depressed mood become functionally impairing. It's where a person no longer is able to manage themselves effectively and to do the things that they need to do in order to be effective in their life. And if your kid or you is sort of at that point, not just because it's been a really bad day or two, but because day in, day out, you're really struggling to manage yourself, or your kid's really struggling to manage herself as she's going through the day, I think, that's functional impairment. And it's at that stage, we've got to say, okay, look, how do we bring in resources to support yourself or your kid? And that's where you need to identify clinical resources. It goes without saying, we're available to people. We want to make sure that that the Truman Group has worked in your community a lot, and that we do this work to help people manage these really different experiences all the time. There are other resources, I know, but the key is not that you use us or anybody else, is that you do something to make sure that you try to support people who are in that level of distress and disruption. So what I was hoping I could do now is just talk a little bit about, or to throw this open for questions. If there's questions or comments, or, we've got literally 1 minute though. So I've managed our time not brilliantly well, I'm afraid. Does anybody have a question or a comment they wanna put out there for us? Nada, do you have a question?
No, I was just, I don't, I can add a comment. I have so many questions, but I think it's that balance and that awareness of how our emotions impact our kids' emotions, and how tied together all that is, and the kind of environment we create in our home. And I know that personally, when I come home, it's hard for me to be calm and relaxed. And I think, okay, I was joking, I think maybe with Charles the other day, I was saying, sometimes I feel like we've moved past learning and what are the goals and what are the hopes to let's get it done. It's tense. It's get this work finished, check off the seesaw, or, the Google Classroom. And so it's really helpful for that kind of step back and being aware. I love the idea of spaces or times that you call it, and being cognizant of what's going on for yourself in that moment.
You said something that is just so exceptionally important in that, which is, the idea that, your emotional experience affects the emotional experience of your children. I mean, that's absolute kung fu in terms of thinking about the ways that you can be engaged and supportive and effective with another human being, especially a kid, as a parent. Because and when again, that's why I love Meg's thing about attunement, right? Because that attunement, this is really good. The attunement is partially about being attuned to the kid, but it's also attuned to yourself, and then being attuned to the interaction between your emotional experience and your kid's emotional experience. That gets people like me all fired up about thinking about how do you think in a sophisticated way about supporting parents at any stage in a child's development. I think it's a really beautiful point. It's a really beautiful point. I thank you all for inviting us to come. Thank you so much for giving us a chance to speak with you. I am so sorry that I'm not there in person. I can't wait until I get to stand in a room with you all and talk to you about some of these issues when things free up again.
So Meg and Sean, thank you so much for being with us, and everyone else who's out there on the screen. Just know that we will send some information out if you're interested in joining in to learn along with Meg. So thank you, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you. Good night.
Bye, everybody.
Night, everyone. Thanks.